Thank you all very much for going here. The reason we put this panel together, and I want to thank Sallie, Josh, and Robert for coming up here, is I'm really interested in the collapse, what I feel is a collapse of trust in institutions, and where a lot of communities are. And Sallie, I mean, this has been a remarkable day, from Al Franken on, and what's going on with Roy Moore, and I just want to just drag it out, because when we think about these questions about how our democracy works, it is also how we as people and citizens fit, whether we're affirmed, whether we're empowered, whether we have voice. And you know, I've known you for a long time when you were at Bank of America. Well, not that, I mean, you're so young, but I've known you since early youth. And with Ellevest and what you've done to kind of help counsel women financially, I just want to get a snapshot from you on how you feel, what are you feeling right now in this time in American democracy? Are you worried, happy, things going well?
Speaking for professional women, because Ellevest, my business Elevate Network, are communities of now a couple 100,000 professional women. I think we're collectively saying, Matt Lauer, Charlie Rose, the men that I allowed into my home over my first coffee in the morning, I mean, that's an intimate relationship. We're living in an age, I hope, coming out of an age of hypocrisy, when we gave our trust to those men. And as it turns out, as professional women, who, by the way, have been working hard and leaning in and doing what we're supposed to do, and we've made no progress on gender diversity in the workplace. We've made no progress on the gender pay gap. It's 100+ years from closing. And the sense of, we thought the playing field was maybe not completely even, but not as tilted as it is. And by the way, if more men are chasing women around the desk, then there's more gender bias than we thought, and even subtle gender bias. That we thought the pact was, if we worked hard and did the whole work-life balance thing and played by the rules, we would get ahead, but it hasn't worked for years. And by the way, those businesses that told us they were meritocracies have been mantocracies. And how do we get in? And I think there's a direct line between the election of Trump, the march, and then so many women waited for our Gloria Steinem, our generation's Gloria, to show up, and she didn't show up. And so we got pissed off, and women started naming names. And women did something we haven't done before in great numbers, enabled by social media. We began amplifying and supporting each other in a way we didn't even a couple of years ago. And it's a sea change, in my opinion.
Well,
thank you.
If I could just
go ahead, Robert.
Just jump in there. But we also got to that point partly by the sort of the failure of old media, but also the restoration of old media. I mean, the middle part of there was the New York Times starting to put a spotlight on Harvey Weinstein, but in particular also Ronan Farrow, who was really went after Weinstein, possibly because of his own familial history on how these things are real, and the failure of individuals of not being believed. So you do have this situation where the old institutions are certainly failing across the board, not just media, but a lot of the other institutions, and men have to be held into account. But we do see that older media institutions do still definitely have a role to expose these, even if they are, pardon the expression, expose themselves.
Well, let me ask you, Robert, because I'm going to out Robert on something here, that he used to be Newt Gingrich's lead speechwriter. So I look at you as the guy who can channel.
I take credit for the good speeches, not the bad ones.
Yeah, the good speeches by Newt. But I look at you as someone who can channel a certain current in the American political spectrum, which is valuable to do, because I want to know how your friends on the right are looking at this time. Do they look at these issues that are emerging as problems to solve, or do they look at them as a zero-sum game where they need to clobber and subjugate the opposition?
Well, at this point, I'm not so sure how many of them are consider themselves my friends anymore on the right. I think it's more the latter. I mean, what's interesting? Yesterday they had a sort of fake vote on impeachment in the House. And it's basically 19 years short of maybe 2 weeks from the actual impeachment vote of Bill Clinton. And it's kind of funny how both parties have sort of kind of flipped. The Democrats are sort of the moral absolutists when it comes to sexual harassment, and the Republicans have become the moral relativists, and they were sort of the opposite 2 decades ago. Not all Republicans, but significant members of them, obviously the president and the RNC and so forth, have basically decided that Roy Moore has to be elected in Alabama because you've got a 2-3 vote margin in the Senate, and power is everything, regardless of whether you want to dismiss all these women to the side and 20 years ago, it was a little bit different. But that's where the Republican Party as a whole is right now. You've got some outliers like Jeff Flake and others, and Paul Ryan to a certain extent. But that's where it is. It's power over morality or anything else.
Josh, I don't know if people have heard Josh's excellent show that he moderates right, left, center. Left, right, and center. I'm occasionally the center or the tag on at the end. I don't know what it is, but I love Josh's judiciousness and kind of bringing in every view and talking about it. But as we look at it, yesterday the Atlantic hosted a major LGBTQ forum. We had a transgender man who is he is the only transgender man to receive a promotion after he had been out as a transgender man. He's Commander Blake, if I remember, and he was very powerful. It was a very powerful moment to look at, and it just made me think that Donald Trump had tweeted out a ban on transgender service, and the system, Jim Mattis, still has transgender service people serving in the military, and they're working out a system. So there was an element there with what Donald Trump ordered by tweet didn't happen overnight. When we have this announcement on Jerusalem come out, Nikki Haley said, it's not as bad as everyone said. In fact, we're not making any statements on how Jerusalem may sort itself out in the future. Now, I don't quite believe that, but nonetheless, we have this kind of interesting thing going on where I'm not sure what is right, center, and left hearing some of these areas, and I'm interested in how you frame the stakes today.
Yeah, well, I think it's very different for the federal government than it is from state and local governments. And I think it's actually sometimes instructive to look at fairly normal, fairly functional politics at the state and local level where disputes are about things and people have elections about what they want the government to do, and then you elect people. I mean, like you had this school board change in Colorado. The election was a very clear thing about whether or not to have vouchers. Right. The voters went to the polls on that issue. They elected this board that had a different position. They changed the policy. There's a direct connection between what the direct functions of state and local governments, what people want them to do. Even in Kansas, where you had this huge tax cut imposed by Republicans, on this promise that it would generate a lot of economic growth, and it didn't work. And a few years later, you had a still Republican-controlled state legislature go back and repeal that tax package because they had seen it didn't work. It was interfering with the functions of state government, and these elected officials who had specific aims about what the government should do, it wasn't working for that, and so they went and they changed it. When you look at the federal level, you had this election that was about, Colin Kaepernick not standing for the national anthem, and can we say Merry Christmas? And on the Democratic side, Hillary Clinton had a very long policy platform, arguably too long a policy platform, but I don't think it was really central to her political appeal either. I don't think people were voting for Hillary Clinton because of her position on short-termism and business investment and that sort of thing. It was about stronger together, and in both cases, it was about a social vision. And that's not about direct powers of the government. So in a sense, electing Donald Trump was not so much about getting transgender people out of the military is about having a president who would say things about how it was bad to have transgender people in the military. That for a lot of his voters, I think the deliverable is the message. It's not so much the policy. And so you have a lot of voters, people are sort of puzzled over these states where the Medicaid expansion has been really important. A lot of people are on Medicaid, depend on it for their medical care, went and voted for Donald Trump, and they would say, well, I don't think he's going to take it away. And even though he tried, that has proved true. He has been unable, he has not focused that much on delivering the actual policy deliverables. And so I think, to an extent, the voters who decided that policy wasn't that important in federal elections, to some extent they're being proved right. It is really about social signaling, which is kind of a stupid way to use the federal government. But it seems to be what the voters wanted to do, and to some extent it's bearing out.
Sallie, you were once, and maybe still, considered one of the most powerful women in the world, and I'm interested, if you had ultimate power, what magic would you unleash to restore trust and empathy and mutual concern, a sense that everybody is in the same boat, so that, I mean, I'm just interested in how you fix this. Right? It's such a mess. I want to get beyond talking and diagnosing the mess and say, okay, we have a mess. What do we do to get back to a country where it's not just a zero-sum game between communities?
Yeah, well, it's obviously so many people who feel like they've lost out over such a period of time, where their communities have been hollowed out, the manufacturing has left, and they look to the coast and they look to Wall Street, who have done very well, and they feel hurt and angry and disillusioned and disappointed, and to your point, then thrash around for a solution.
Right.
Which, I wonder, and I'd love the answer, how many are beginning to realize that Trump was not the solution, that Trump will actually, through his policies, hurt them. When I look at my background, and they begin to work to strip away, the regulators, they're moving away from a fiduciary standard, which is no way that's good for the individual investors, and they look to strip away, to the guy who's the interim head of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is saying it's a sad, sick joke. Did they really elect that president to strip away their protections? Of course they didn't, right? And they've sort of put themselves in a worse position as a result of it, but it came from anger. And so, again, I talk to women, we elected this groper-in-chief. I don't, of course, believe that the American people decided to do that. They did it in spite of it, but it's caused an enormous amount of hurt.
Well, I think part of the problem you have, though, is particularly in the context of the federal government, folks down in the individual states don't necessarily have a connection as to how that's supposed to impact them. Consumer Federal Protection Board sounds very nice. If you tell them, oh well, it'll keep the credit card companies at bay. Maybe that'll click with them. But I think in general they don't really know what that it's just one more.
Oh, no, of course they don't.
And the fact that they don't, in a sense, is sort of a failure of those who created it for not trying to educate the public and saying this is why this is important. This has a direct bearing on the 2008 financial crisis.
I want to go to the audience here in a minute and get questions, but to Josh and Robert for a moment. Do you think the media? I mean, I hate talking about the media because we're not really as homogenized as that word makes us sound. But you're at the Daily News, Josh, you're Business Insider, and everywhere else, New York Times, and so on. What are we missing? What are we failing at that we shouldn't be doing? I mean, we're very self-serious and celebrate our importance during these stressed out times. But what are we screwing up on? What are you screwing up on, Robert?
Oh goodness! What day of the week is it? Look, I mean, I recognize. Look, I'm a black man that lives in an urban international capital. I don't necessarily have a immediate cultural connection with somebody who's living in Idaho or in Iowa and so forth. And maybe it's my failure that I don't, since I am in the media, that I don't have more of an understanding of what's going on with them. I don't understand why they would vote for Donald Trump beyond just complete pure racial reasons and so forth. Maybe that's part of it. But I mean, for that matter, I don't understand how people live in Staten Island.
I have an idea.
And many of you probably don't either.
I have an idea. When you're watching old clips of Charlie Rose interviewing Kevin Spacey, talking about Bill Clinton's sexual harassment, and you think back to, I don't mean to pick on Matt Lauer, but I actually do. Good old Matt Lauer, going easy on Donald Trump and beating the crud out of Hillary Clinton about her emails in those interviews. And you think about Mark Halperin and how he shaped our views. We had some group, if you think about Harvey Weinstein deciding which movies were made, these very powerful individuals were shaping our view of gender and shaping our view of the election. And some number of them, not all of them yet, some number of them were sexual predators. And so there's no way they took that and then transitioned it into respect.
But part of the problem, though, is but Harvey Weinstein was one of Hillary's major contributors. So the connections between the predator and those who are sort of abused in the media by
power.
Predators.
It's the circle of power.
So let me get to where Josh.
Let
me get to where Josh is screwing up.
I think the media gets a bad rap, and I think we have done a good job in covering politics and public policy over the last few years, at least at the federal level. I think state and local coverage is under-resourced for a number of reasons. The thing about media today is that the outlets control what gets produced, and the consumers control what gets consumed. It matters much less what goes on homepages, what goes on the front page of the newspaper, because many fewer people get the newspaper in print. When they're seeing media, they're seeing it through social media, through sharing and that sort of thing. And so you can't, there's lots of excellent deep coverage on public policy, on what the stakes are in these elections. You can't make people read it, and there have been endless profiles of what people think in southwestern Ohio and these sorts of places, and why they voted for Trump. And the problem,
but after the fact.
Yeah, well, there was a fair amount of it before as well. Because his win in the primaries was surprising also. And I think part of the reason that coverage is unsatisfying is that people don't fully understand why they vote the way they vote in any election. I think if you ask supporters of any candidate, why do you like this candidate? The answers they give you are not necessarily what's psychologically driving them. I have a friend who's at a right-of-center think tank who lives in St. Petersburg, Florida, and he says that several people in Pinellas County have told him that they voted for Donald Trump because they were mad about Beyonce at the Super Bowl. Now, which is stupid. But it's reflective. But it's reflective of the fact that it's reflective of the fact that I think for a lot of especially white voters, it was sort of inchoate racial / social and they can't describe for you exactly why they felt the way they felt.
Thank you. I wanted to have a discussion to show the audience that people in the media actually are introspective, that they are thinking about the struggles we do. Thank you for this division. And Sallie, thanks I really look forward to your next book on Harvey and Matt. So I want to go to a question, but I plan a question. Ted Roosevelt is here, Theodore Roosevelt IV. And Ted, I'm picking on you because you're another of my favorite Republicans. And what we didn't have on the panel today, but I think it's so important, is other parts of our society that maybe not written into the Constitution, but, the environment which you live in, which I know you're obsessed with, and science. And I'm interested in how you see the challenges, just brief form. Ted Roosevelt.
You're giving a microphone to a Roosevelt and expect us to be brief?
You got 30 seconds, pal.
Science is something I'm afraid that my party is largely repudiated. 1 out of 4, maybe 2 out of 4 Americans think that we live, I'll use a $100 word, in a geocentric world rather than a heliocentric world.
Right.
What does that mean? They think that the sun goes around the planet Earth rather than the other way around. And for some reason, Republicans and many Americans repudiate science without bothering to think about it. Heather, earlier in the panel, talked about the incredible importance of the scientific revolution. We need to go back to that and educate ourselves. And I think the media has a role in that and helping us do that. Because if we don't understand basic science, we're not going to make decisions and policies based on fact.
Well, thank you for that. And I want to give the audience, our panel here, just a quick reaction on other institutional frameworks we should be worried about that we're not talking about and should be.
Well, I just want to note that a big reason people lost trust in institutions is that institutions failed. We had this avoidable economic crisis due to bad policy in the financial sector. We had a war that made no sense. The U.S. failed to protect itself against the September 11 terror attacks. And wage growth has been, anemic to bad for, going on a couple of decades now. So I think, the first step to getting people to trust the institutions more is not so much grabbing them by the shoulders and asking them why the hell they don't trust institutions, why they don't believe science, that sort of thing. The institutions do their jobs better, people will feel better about them.
The institutions also need, obviously, better people. If I tried to pitch a story that said there is a congressman who is trying to convince two of his female employees to be his surrogate, nobody would ever believe me. But that is exactly what has happened. That's why there's a congressman from...
Not his surrogate like going on television to speak on his behalf. His surrogate like to carry his child.
To carry his child. Thank you very much. I apologize. To carry his children. I would be laughed at. That's absolutely nuts. But that's why there's an Arizona congressman named Trent Franks who's about to resign. Unfortunately, we have a number of bad people in bad institutions, and that's true in the media. It's true in Congress. It's true in business. And thankfully, a lot of them are going out. But we need more people, and that may get back to the education question.
And Sallie Krawcheck, you get the last word.
Well, let me talk about two industries/institutions that I'm familiar with, which are Wall Street and Silicon Valley. These industries, through their capital, trillions of dollars of capital, balance sheets on Wall Street, hundreds of billions of dollars of investment dollars in Silicon Valley, pick winners and losers in our society. They pick the best businesses to invest in. They pick the best businesses to start. To get back on my bandwagon, Wall Street, no female CEOs, traders 90% male. Financial advisors, 86% male. The industry has not returned its cost of capital to its shareholders in as long as anyone can remember. They're making money now. Remember the financial crisis? Through a cycle, they've done a very poor job. And they leave out vast swaths of society. Silicon Valley, the returns they earn are better. You could do the same by investing in the S&P 500 in your corner brokerage. Of the money they put out, 2%, 2.5% go to female-funded companies. To people of color, forget it. To women of color, doubly forget it. They're not getting the returns. And they're excluding vast swaths of the population. These are the mantocracies that occur. Now, what's really sort of interesting, if you go another level, is where do they get their capital? They get it from endowments and foundations and universities whose raison d'etre is a fairer society. And so we have our underlying institutions that are funding these industries that are excluding vast swaths of the population, one of which has been dangerous for the health of the economy and the other which ain't doing such a great job.
On that wonderful optimistic note, I want to thank Sallie Krawcheck, Josh Barro, and Robert George for taking us down this institutional question. I look forward to having you back. Sallie, thank you. Josh, thank you.